Halloween legend. The rooster crows again. There's usually this crackling, obnoxious noise which sends chills down the children of farm town any day. Between school and chores, nothing good would ever come from this wretched alarm. This self-serving alarm at that. I mean, who would ever expect a father to put such an over-the-top wake-up call, except someone who wants to yell at their children a few more hours a day? Someone who needs extra hands to do the work for them. Definitely not a kid. Especially not a kid from birth who knows that if you can't do it yourself, this probably shouldn't be done. Whoosh. The piercing light shot through the window. Jimmy's mother pulled the curtains back. She had a huge smile on her face because she knew today was a special day. Today, today was the start of the holiday season, his favorite time of year. Funny, she'd think to herself how the harvest, a time of extra chores, would be one of the most anticipated holidays for children. Wakey, wakey, don't make me put on the baby voice. Jimmy was 13 and way too old to be treated like a child for years now, so of course he typically acted like a big baby when she did. He felt the cold whip of air sweep through the newly opened window and was up, dressed, and out the door before his mother could turn around. October 1st. It was here. Finally. He'd been waiting all year for this month, and he knew this year, unlike the last 3 or 4, would finally hold up to his expectation, that this was the year Halloween would be back on the map. He had it all planned out, with the perfect allies to help it all come true. He would spend the majority of the month watching Halloween episodes and movies with his buddies, and building decorations with his father, as much as he could anyway. And anyone else in the neighborhood who needed extra hands. Then around the 15th, he would pick out his costume. Next to trick-or-treating, this is the most important part. I mean, if you don't have a good costume, you don't get good candy. October 31st, the most important day in a kid's life. As far as he was concerned, Jimmy went speeding around the sidewalk corners, watching the first of the browning leaves falling through the newly crisp air. How could anyone not love this time of year? The smell, the chill, the kids jumping into the first piles of leaves, even though they knew it wasn't big enough to shield them from the hard ground under it. It felt like he was running as fast as a car, even though the one he noticed was coming to a stop sign, and appearing as if they were going the same speed. He was around the next corner before it began moving again. Even the sound of the engine increasing power fell silent to the look of Sack's face. Sack and Jimmy were Halloween junkies. He was even given this nickname for that very reason. He would carry 5 or 6 satchels for Halloween candy, more than he'd ever be able to fill in that so many years. Most of the time, he carried so many that it actually his costume would get lost under all the bags. Such as they neared the crash, as they nearly crashed into each other, anyone who was watching would almost say the unlegible noise coming from their mouths might have been the only thing that prevented them from crashing headfirst into each other. The noise was completely undistinguishable to anyone over 13 years of old. If you had a tape recorder and slowed it down to view it, you would learn that in the 2 minutes of talking, about 15 paragraphs of information was spit out of their mouths, agonizing over Halloween, how they couldn't wait, where their friends were, wondering why they weren't there, wondering what shows they found this year, and what ones they were going to watch first, leaving the cooler and scarier ones for later in the month. Jimmy was worried. They planned this for years and had a bad feeling they would go through the entire list in just one overnight sleepover. He knew that on any given school day, between school, homework, chores, and getting ready for bed, leaves only enough time for roughly about 4 episodes. On a weekend, you can push up to about 8 a day of TV time. But on a sleepover weekend, you might as well think of it as unlimited time until you're there and the things you have lined up don't get finished. They got 5 out of their friends to sleep over, all except Sarah, nicknamed Jill, whose parents decided if she was going to have a Halloween sleepover with 4 boys, would only happen closer to the 31st, not before. Regardless of that, Samantha was already going. And, well, Sam's not our child. You are. And children don't decide how they will raise our children, even if she is our friend. It's not that they were overprotective or overcritical or overintelligent. They just had a designated limit of how much leeway they would give their kid. The others would be arriving at Zach's house later that day. It was unfortunate truth, or so Jimmy thought, that life's responsibilities don't curve for everything, or anything usually. Even things that were so important for the holiday season. I mean, by definition, culture isn't stories or memories. They're how we spend time with our neighbors to show we love them. He was a 6th grader and knew as well as anyone in school why it's better to keep people in an onward projection between bullies and the groups that stand around together picking on people who had no choice but to pass by them in the hallways. He wasn't on their radar yet, but couldn't understand what they needed to be so bitter about. They were always the well-off kids, the ones with good homes, never had to wear dirty clothes or go without food. They had all the good toys and the most popular things as soon as they came out of the stores. Whatever. These were not the things you deal with this time of year. This was the season to ignore the darker things in life and put your full attention into planning the ultimate holiday. Far be it from a kid's attention span to realize the amount of money it takes to put up a good show for the neighbors and strangers who will pass by on that one-night event. Over the years, the tides have been getting steered by the economy and their disgusting New World Order. Even Jimmy's seen how the old holiday shows were disappearing for the new ones year after year. Seeing how the old shows were disappearing for the new ones year after year, almost as if they're trying to steal the soul for the newer model. He never was into Thanksgiving, but he was even less into Christmas things appearing before November 1st. It was horrible. Him and his buddies spent a lot of time discussing this after the whole Xmas in July started. They were Advent holiday enthusiasts and believe each holiday belonged in its own month. Jimmy, Sax, Billy the Butcher, Radcliffe, the Maggot, and Sam spent the night watching TV, drawing designs on paper, making Halloween decorations. They wished Jill was there, but with it being unavoidable, the conversation turned to costume choices. Should they do a group thing? But with Jill not there, it felt weird discussing what she would want without her there. So the conversation turned stale, and all of them drifted steadily to sleep. The next morning, the crew spent the first part of the day quietly watching the next group of shows. John the Maggot was about to squirm himself to explode if Jill hadn't got there and broke the sad vibe. The night before, the sad vibe that the night before had set in. Her bright, smiling face was like a light from beyond the grave that seemed to remove all the cold chills of destitute sadness. She was wearing her festive October month orange jack-o'-lantern t-shirt and quietly jumped right into the movies without making a noise. At nearly 4 o'clock, they broke their zombie-like gaze at the TV, stood up, stretched. Our parents are going to be waiting before the street lights turn on. Everyone agreed. You can always be sure Radcliffe will make the hard decision. They spent the next few hours watching the butcher try to jump across the impossible spring. A jump, he says, a fortune teller once told him. If you can make it across the spring, it'll save your life. Billy, up to date, has broke his arm twice. Once so bad he almost lost it, and his leg once. We think because he was trying to avoid landing on his arm again. He assumed the spring meant jump harder because he'd say fortune tellers always talk in riddles and hide meanings in things. Most of us tried to get him to see reason, but since his brother's truth actually happened, he is dead set. Poor source of world, considering what can save your life ends up leading to the thing that takes it. Jill looked down at her watch and called out, "It's 6:25. We all knew it took about 20 minutes to get home, and most of us had to be in by 7, so we followed Jill and Radcliffe back to town. Jill was always at Radcliffe's side. They were not boyfriend or girlfriend, not brother or sister either. They lived a block apart from each other, and since they hung out with the same group of friends, it appeared it was only a coincidence, not as though any of us were there to speculate about what each other was doing in our group, for that matter. They may hold hands once they're alone. They may separate and continue on their way home without a word. We are a close group and have no need to add extra words to get people into us." The street lights turned on a few minutes early and prevented anything from destroying their holiday season. They picked up their pace and darted home, increasing in speed each step. Jimmy's dad had already got home, but hadn't had the time to take off his work uniform. He went quietly as he could to the downstairs shower and to rinse the day off and get ready for dinner. It took every bit of his willpower to get to the bathroom. The aroma was so strong it put delusions of cartoon hands in his head, dragging him to the food with the fumes, just to steal the entire meal for himself. The sound of his father's shower snapped him out of it, letting him begin cleaning. The meal was a simple selection. They talked the day's events and how the sleepover went. Was their weekend homework due tomorrow? And so forth. "No," Jimmy said. His mother made him do it before he left the house Friday after school. Before bed, they washed the dishes. He got his clothes ready for school tomorrow. Even he knew holidays stopped for school. So he turned on his alarm reluctantly and went to sleep. Over the next week, school was school, home was home. Between homework and chores doesn't leave much time for friends. So the only time they seen each other was on the phone or trading movies with each other. At lunch. Every day after school, he would peek at the garage, hoping to see the tools out, or new building materials leaning against the wall. He got his love of the holidays from his parents, and they would tell him all sorts of stories from their teen years, having decided after they had a kid that they would do what their parents knew nothing about. So every year, they all decided on a theme. And with such little storage space, you give last year's decorations to other celebrating neighbors, saying they have to modify them a little bit so they don't look the same each year. Last year was the vampire theme. They set up bats on Ferris wheels that gave the illusion of a pack of bats flapping their wings. They had some on strings, triangle off trees, so that people hidden behind the black cloth could pull the black wire, sending bats flying past the kids every year. Every year, their home alone needed 5 or 6 people to bring the scenes to life. It had noises and actors, truly amazing. But for a few years now, Jimmy noticed that even though more of their designs were out, that more houses were skipping it entirely. He asked his mother if she thought it was because if it's because we did it so big, or maybe they wanted one of our old ones, but we gave it to someone else. Maybe they're even were waiting for us to make theirs. She put a hand on his shoulder and smiled. The economy's bad and getting worse. With all the prices increasing for everyday items, no one can afford the special things. He looked out across the houses on his block, remembering all the decorations of the past years they had given out. The skeleton dungeon, the graveyard, the swamp, even the creepiest he could remember, the black lagoon in the secret desert, in the desert hills. They had boards set up above the ground, forming a small hillside, and dug a 4-foot hole in the center, rigged up with an air tank. They filled it with water and filled the water with black food coloring. At nightfall, when the curtains unveiled the project, leaving only the eeriest shimmer on the white sands, almost nobody wanted to walk down the path past it when it came into view. We had to actually give a second path to the door for those who were too afraid to pass by it. Then it took a look to his garage door. He didn't want to jinx it, but wondered, did the economy destroy our holidays too? And would the people who have our old things step up to help us in this time of need? It seemed his mother seemed to have felt what he was going through. Don't worry so much. It's only the 7th anyway. Don't you know how it is? It is hard to come up with the next exciting design every year. His mind instantly slowed down. She was right. He was over anxious, and the idea of the lack of decorations around town had got in his head. Perhaps it was the same old movies or the same old lame decorations. The town had began setting up around the street lamps. Even the decorations around school began to lower his enjoyment of the season. It seemed so cliché compared to his family's preparation. The sun was setting later, making him be inside 1 hour earlier, by his accounting, and the next weekend did nothing to help. The school had forced a pep rally on the students, meaning a mandatory school function in his mind. Why couldn't they have done this on Friday afternoon? Why would they wait to steal our Saturday? It's unconstitutional. The more he looked at life, the more he noticed how much was unconstitutional, or at least immoral. Everyone seemed to be acting like those spoiled bullies who think they're better than everyone and still expect a standing ovation for them, and to have their work done for them, and to have their assignments done for them. How couldn't expect their parents to act any different? How else would they learn to be that obnoxious? Their behavior. He sat with his friends at the stands. Some were reading, some drawing, some genuinely trying to watch. But Jimmy was lost to the mundane. Only Father Time could inspire. By the time the game began, the temperature had already dropped. Jimmy looked up at the orange sunset, smelling the season of fall, smells in the crisp air. Not the smell of the trees or the cold, not pumpkins, or just the smell of the season had shifted. Within an hour, the stadium lights were on, and by halftime he was ready to go. The next morning, the gang hadn't any plans on meeting up. Pep rallies always seemed to drag the pep from the days after it, leaving them saturated in many ways. Sam, getting stir-crazy from looking at the same old 5 pictures with her Halloween costume choices, brought out the idea of going into town and seeing some options in person. Then maybe she might come across an accessory or two that may be the missing piece to one of her designs. Their group wasn't bent on having the best costumes or anything, but nonetheless, they still wanted to do it to be cool enough for to be applauded. Exuberation from everyone else. It was earlier than she thought, and many of the stores weren't even open yet. Some of the other stores were adding a few decorative pieces for their window shoppers. Maggie, the seamstress, was adding spiders that were hanging down from the webs she set up earlier. Mr. Jenkins, the shoe shop, had a new assortment of scarecrows and pumpkins. Even the convenience store's fire hydrant was lightly covered to appear as a mummy. She wondered if it was enough to keep the fire department off their backs. Last year they got a ticket for putting a cardboard character in front of it, where the fire station couldn't see the fire hydrant in a hurry, keeping her eyes on it as she passed by. She thought to herself, well, it still looks like a fire hydrant. Then Radcliffe's dogs flew by barking at something horrible, nearly knocking her loopy. Focusing her eyes to see what had happened, but had to giggle when Ratcliffe flew past her after him. As she approached the corner, a stray football caught her eye, and on instinct she drifted forward to catch it. Before even looking to see who tossed it. "Sam!" the kids screamed, as if they just won the greatest thing ever. Sam was addicted to sports, and spent most of her free time practicing, training, playing, and watching sports. It's really all she was, and wanted to be. She turned the laces to her fingers, and launched the ball back, so far in fact that none of the kids' faces could be seen. It was all back of the heads. As she walked into position for the game the kids had screamed, inviting her to play a moment earlier, the 3 dogs were fast. Radcliffe was prepared. His parents taught him the greatest secret when he got his first one. They said if you take a dog on the same path every day for its walk, it will always follow that path, even when it escapes. So we knew they would end up back at the house eventually, unless stray dogs, dog catchers, or cars hindered their mindless speed. These were the only reasons he followed, next to the endurance he was gaining trying to stop them. He even had a few shortcuts on his route that allowed him to get ahead of them, not as though that made him stop any better. He had dog treats for that, not like bad dogs get treats or anything. His dog walk path was only a few 100 yards or so, nothing next to the 8 square mile village he lived in. Small enough for a car to ignore it, and large enough to walk across, or too large to walk across and see it all in a week, just the way he liked it. Outside the bordered roads of the village consisted of, on one side was the empty farmland, as far as the eye could see. On the other half was a fierce, dense forest headed up to the jagged mountain ridge. The stream headed straight from a lonely waterfall that came out of nowhere. The group spent the entire summer one year trying to find where the water went underground to form the falls, but to no avail. It's as though it comes from the center of the earth, like you would find dinosaurs before the huge amount of water that's needed to come out of to make the stream last forever. The parents never liked them going into the woods, but the falls were only about a quarter of a mile in, and what am I doing? And the ground was relatively secure. Before their knowing this, because they were themselves used to play it as children here. Legend says that this was witch territory, and once, or so they say, a cottage made of candy appeared there overnight. Now you can argue how childish it sounds, but why make something childish? You demand. Is it too dangerous after hours? Now bear in mind, this is a small town. Even during the rest of the year, you can notice the people start acting weird around strange girls who's coming to town, or even worse, if she or one of theirs people she's with has any kind of skin abnormality. They would call it the rot of the witch on the skin. They say they kidnap children. They eat the boys and recruit the girls, which would be great, I suppose, if you didn't know how badly they torture the girls. Their bodies are made of shattered glass, so they can't break anymore. And once their bodies begin to show it's becoming glass, they start teaching them their spells, which begins rotting their skin. The more you use it, the more you end up with an actual green skin of the witch. And it all starts with eating the boys with them and having your toes cut off so that the girls can't run away. I wouldn't want to see what happens if you don't eat your brother. The kids would all laugh, but as you get older you realize the parents' faces are dead serious, and have always been, with discussing these subjects. An eerie truth when talking about a cottage made of candy. October 15th, the gang was hanging out in Jimmy's room, fiddling their own business. Sax and Sam were on the computer. The maggot was neck deep in the pirate ship in a bottle. Jimmy was watching the news with the butcher, while Jamal and Jill were in the bathroom braiding his hair, so to be ready for Halloween. It had got rather large since the last school year. Ratliff always wanted a fro. He thought it would make him look smarter, like Albert Einstein. And the other old smart and the other old smart guy, make him look smarter like Albert Einstein, and the other old smart guys with the big white wigs. Don't bother. But his parents said he could have one if he got his grades up for more than 2 semesters. With half the braids done, he smiled at himself in the mirror with a glimmer in his eye, turning his head to and fro, checking out the angles. Damn, that's a pretty black man. Who else could have all this? Looked so good. Without batting an eye, Jill grabbed him by the ear and put him back into position. Baby, I got prettier skin than you, and we ain't got nothing on Sam. Don't worry, Sam added from the other conjoined bedroom, still sitting. You're still the third hottest black person in the room, with a smirking grin on her face, being the only third black person in the room. Ratliff didn't even hear Jill, let alone Sam. Yeah, I'm too fine. He wasn't an egomaniac or anything. He just loved his hair. He's 15 and been waiting his entire life, or more if you think how he talks about it, for his hair to finally fill in. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, the 8 a.m. board meeting on the 78th floor of the office building was just beginning. Everyone was finally dressed, carrying their matching accessories, walking through the large conference table. It was always an early meeting this time of year, because it would run late into the evening, despite the fact that everyone knows what's going to end the same place as it always does, with the decision to lower the candy prices after the holiday. Most would think they own stock in the dental field. They would argue how lowering the prices beforehand would make people feel as though they could buy more. So of course, if they lowered the font sizes to font size, they would say raising the prices back afterwards would let them save money and not buy candy until the next holiday. And then they would say, if we only get people to buy when it's on sale, you'll be out of job, and you should be looking for a way to make them go buy faster. So they needed to buy more and more often, despite the price and size. It was the same argument every year. The senior members knew that the higher-ups only do these meetings to tell the lowers that it's time to put it in effect, not to debate it, while proving they're worth their outrageous salaries. Now back at home, it was turning 2:30, and Sack was walking down the neighborhood street curb, kicking a soda can down the road that appeared to have been once a noisemaker for some kid's bicycle tire, when the maggot caught his eye. Ain't you getting too old for that? The maggot looked up and then back down. He was using his eyeglasses to burn ants. While Socks added, You gonna go pull the tail off lizards and the wings off flies next? He put the glasses back on his face and stood up and said, At least the lizard's tail grows back. Where you headed? To the convenience store for some snacks? Then Maggot was about to add on to the convenience store when an unbearable sound of 100 crows squawking began to cover their heads. They looked up to find the power lines covered in crows. They must be taking a break, migrating. Can't be an easy trip. Sacks. The maggot said coldly, Crows don't migrate. I heard they only get like this when there's a dead body nearby. See, I told you shouldn't be killing them ants. You're messing with Mother Nature. Sachs was born in Japan, and when he smiled, his eyes nearly disappeared. The group knows he does it on purpose. merely to act pompous. But no big deal. Everyone has a quirk or two. When out of nowhere police sirens began to blare, 3 or 4 cop cars shot by. They both looked at each other, not needing to say a word, jetting as fast as they could inside the same direction. Nothing ever happens in this town that doesn't happen every year, so you don't miss the opportunity to witness anything firsthand. They followed the sound around the corner and found the officers trying to talk a hijacker who was caught robbing the very same convenience store they were headed to anyway. A shot fired, but the store fired out the store window, sending the two behind the bus stop bench. Do you think this is strong enough to stop it? The maggot looked at the spaces in between the 2x4 boards of the bench. It was probably just a warning shot, to show he means business. Okay. The cop's loudspeaker pleaded. Don't shoot. We'll use the phone. Just tell us what you want, and don't hurt anyone. A news cop had just arrived and began to circle the scene, doing nothing but adding fuel to the fire. Back at Jimmy's house, he was upstairs in his bathroom, combing his barely there mutton chops. He was only 13. He was almost 14, barely out of his peach fuzz stage, and though they were coming in great until he thought about how he must sound like Ratcliffe. When the TV in his room caught his ear, he walked out to see the standoff when his eyes noticed his buddies crouched down at the bus stop. I'm never going to hear the end of this, he thought to himself. Hours later, all would come to find out that the guy was on drugs and couldn't afford candy. Thank goodness the price hadn't gone up yet, as the board members' phone calls were telling everyone to do. He might have killed someone. Monday, October 28th, the last day of school until Friday. And to top it all off, beyond Friday, the Friday thing, today is a half day for all the Halloween party. The teachers seemed to be miles away, and all the kids danced, ate treats, and talked with friends. They were all having a great time until the butcher noticed that all the bullies were gone, usually meaning someone's in trouble again. Just unlike the typical school day, there's about 0% chance of a teacher stopping it before they pushed somebody into becoming a serial killer. A serial killer with a list. Lucky for most of the people on that list, might not belong here anyway. But they have the people who usually don't have people you care about on the lists. Even though if they really cared, they wouldn't have let it turn into that. The teachers would have been watching out for that. Hey guys, the monsters are AWOL. I need your help. Well, what's Halloween without fear? Yeah, this is like taking a group of Frankensteins. They watched the angles, waiting for the teachers to give them a clear escape without being seen. Suiting up, they were in the empty hallways. The halls were cold and quiet. Okay, where's the spots? Bathroom, gym, kitchen. Yeah, and we shouldn't split it up. We don't want to catch any of us. We don't want them to catch any of us alone. They all nodded in agreement and jogged to the nearest restroom, even though they would most likely be in one that they'll want to be disturbed. It only took 10 minutes to check all the bathrooms and gymnasium. But as they approached the kitchen, they heard the muffled sound of whispers. Jimmy put his finger to his mouth, shh, and peeked into the kitchen through the through the windows on the flapping doors. They were there arguing over how much laxative they should use, how much laxative they can use without killing kids. Finally, they tossed the unused box into the garage and ran out of the kitchen, headed back to the arboretum. We can't let them get away with this, picking up the X-lax. They're gonna let everyone eat that pudding and watch it all go bad. Hey, Radcliffe spoke up. I got an idea. I need some distractions, and we need to toss that pudding. Ha ha, toss the poopy pudding. The butcher laughed to himself quietly as they went for the bowl, almost nearly sticking his finger in, until the maggot slapped his hand. Oh yeah, the laxative. That's no problem, but if you do it again, I will be waiting until it's too late. They all headed out of the cafeteria, headed back to the auditorium, deciding how they would put the laxative into the food without causing the whole school to be evacuated. They finally decided to put a "I wasn't watching where I was going" rough version to good use. Good idea. With two of us involved in it, guarantee they will all get up to back up their friend. All they had to do was wait until they pulled out. All they had to do was wait until the food was served. By this time, Radcliffe had returned after refilling the pudding and getting more laxative from the nurse's office. The cupboard and Jill was making sure the teacher stayed occupied. She was a straight A student and the teachers loved her. Look, Jimmy said, gesturing to the bullies. Jill's talk with them seems to have got under their skin. Good, this should be easy now. Right, guys, you're on. Sam and Jill worked fast, and I'll try to break them up, plus keep their attention from you girls. They started roughhousing halfway across the room, slowly working their way closer, appearing as in earnest. When the maggot pushed Radcliffe, who spun with the momentum into a run. 2 steps, he crashed into one on the chair. It worked perfectly. The bullies were up before Radcliffe was, and the girls went right to work, putting a few drops on the cookies, in their drinks. It worked a lot faster, making the guys feel like they were already dead. It felt like hours before the teachers were there to break it up, and even longer to walk back to the group, talking about how bad they're going to get it when they realize how bad they've been. They're going to get us until we graduated from high school. High school? We have to get into a college out of state, and I still can't guarantee they won't follow us. Yeah, it's not like they're getting into college, and so they'll have all kinds of time on their hand. They had a real terror in their eyes as they reached their friends, who began nudging them to look back. The looks on their faces were priceless. Big-eyed, big cheeks, all holding their stomachs, at least until they stood up and were all holding their butts. The farts were so fierce, it caught the attention of the entire student body that all broke out laughing, watching the group waddle out the door. The gang realized they had to do more than mingle. They had to be so fun. No one would want to leave early, inadvertently making themselves suspects for the who did it problem. The hours flew by. And even as the day came to an end, the kids cheered for the teachers to let the half day go into a full day. Sorry, kids, the parents are already waiting, and we can't just do things without putting it into an agenda. All the kids booed on the way out, laughing and playing down the halls. This had to be the greatest school party in history. Did you see all the looks on their faces? I think we might have got away with it. No, they may not be smart, but they're not dumb. And they were only away from their food once. Yes, but we're always roughhousing with each other. And they have more than one person who would be willing to do that to them. They all agreed, so long as they can't get to the video camera recordings, they'll never know who's seen them in the kitchen. It was never meant to be a life-changing engagement, but it surely ended faster than anyone else acted like. Jimmy, you still up for picking your pumpkin tomorrow? Yeah, I guess. Whoa. Since when are you all quiet about anything holiday? No. Don't worry, I'm totally there. The bullies. That next day was the problem. And there was something wrong with this holiday. He just didn't want to alarm his friends. Was he getting too old? Was there some symptom given off by the last couple of years from the skippers? He didn't know anything except that he was tired of thinking about it. He had spent the entire month thinking about it, and it was wearing thin. He didn't even have fun building his family's yard decorations, a spooky haunted swamp graveyard, needing 3 employees to run it, with his father playing the swamp monster made of swamp plants and tentacles. It alone needed an extra person to control the 3 extra tentacles out of the 5 by pulling the black strings. The next day, his friends noticed a full new face on Jimmy. Whoa, what happened to you? They walked around the pumpkin patch with a skip in his step and wouldn't say a word. He wouldn't say a word until he found the perfect pumpkin for his parents. I did it. Did what? I found out why I've been such a funk lately. It's because I'm supposed to be at the next stage of this Halloween thing. I mean, I'm 14. We're teenagers. We're supposed to be egging houses and toilet papering them, and I think I might even smash pumpkins this year. Crash! The biggest lightning strike in the world screamed across the sky. The girls screamed, jumping at the boys, who collapsed, forming a big pile on the ground around them. The second was not as impressive, but the strike hit the pumpkin in his hand and wrapped out. It struck the scarecrow's hand, and the pumpkin in Jimmy's hand pulled out of his hand and landed in the scarecrow's. Now with a full jack-o'-lantern face already carved in it. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The great PumpkinKing gets furious when the devil's children destroy all his mediums, preventing him from protecting his humans. The kids were too petrified to move, let alone talk to each other. Is that the scarecrow? Jill elbowed him hard to shut him up. The sky had turned darker than nighttime, and the further they tried to look away from the sentient life form, the more the sky began to strobe light, flashing until they were even getting headaches. But as soon as they turned their attention back to the light slowed, becoming darkness, and the headache disappeared. How dare you defile Halloween on a pumpkin patch? You must be the lowest of all the devil's kids. You with your volley of your errands by testing and consequence personally. You will learn the volley of your errands by tasting the consequences personally. Perhaps if you survive the eclipse with the spirit realm, you may save your own soul. If not, you can be damned like the rest of them. Before anyone could move their mouths, the sky burst back into a brilliant blue, a clearer blue than anyone had ever seen, and the pumpkin was back in his arms, uncut. They looked at each other and said nothing. The confusion built up so strong that they became uncomfortable and insecure, leaving them nothing to do but separate and disappear. They had the longest walk home of their lives. Was that real? How could it be? And why can't I go back to my friends and talk about it? They all thought to themselves. No one went outside on the 29th, and they didn't even call each other to talk to their families, other than the polite pleasantries. They heard the words and felt like they were insane. They had lost the luxury. Sunrise, October 30th, All Hallows Eve. Maybe the solitude of the day before. Maybe it was the solitude of the day before. But they had to find each other as fast as possible. It didn't take long to realize the world had changed. Somehow. They couldn't quite put their finger on how. But it was there, an ominous fuzz, just out of view. They could all feel like the sun seemed to be more orange than usual in the sky. More orange than the sky was blue the other day. For the next couple of hours, they rode from house to house, always missing each other. And to make it all worse, none of the cell phones worked. Even the old payphone at the convenience store was oddly silent. The hours flew by, and they seemed to be in some kind of neighborhood joke. Everyone in town was ignoring them as if they were ghosts. Ghosts that couldn't go through things, or were pushed aside by passerbyers. Who's ever heard about ghosts like that? The hours were draining. The hours were draining our friends heavily, and all their steps became slower, even walking their bikes from their butt pain from sitting so long. Seems like we're getting all kinds of revenge on us. Maybe we are the devil's children. By around 6 p.m. they began noticing strange blurs moving around the streets. It was from the particular fuzz feeling. The fuzz had shifted. With the sun, it was shifting with the sun's path overhead. No one knew it. It felt like they were on a 5-cup of coffee and couldn't calm down for the life of them. Jimmy decided this was marvelous and turned to the pumpkin patch. This is where it all started. Sax was already there. Thank goodness. I've been standing here for an hour and a half, and I thought I was the only one left. Me too. I've been walking since sunrise. Yeah, me too. I can't find anyone. And no one will talk to me. Does your cell phone work? No, and neither does the payphone. Okay, right. Let's get to that scarecrow. Yeah, but only if you don't get mad and threaten him with smashing anything again. Definitely. They turned to the gate that for some reason was opening by itself. Ratcliffe had made his way to the butcher's neighborhood. The fuzz thing in the streets was becoming more clear, and they knew this village as well as any adult. They all grew up here. So why were there decorations in empty lots? Before today, there was only about 15% of the town decorated. Now it seemed to be more like 40%, not the homes or added to the already decorations, but here and there, places where there wouldn't be any. Not just flimsy plastic decorations, but like real life things. Like it's Jimmy's family finally decided to decorate the whole town. After leaving the butcher's house, it was then as he passed by the same graveyard he passed by earlier, he noticed creepy ghouls aimed at him. And they were at least 6 ghouls with pointy ears, fur, and fangs. They got low and snarled at him, trying to hide themselves from his view, slowly moving into the shadows of the graves. Ghouls? Vampires' daytime coffin guards? Nearly as strong as its master it's protecting. All this passed through his head. It made him feel sick and even crazier. It was all too much. So he picked up his pace. Jill looked up at the sun that seems to be smiling an eerie, distant grin. A grin that says, I have a secret and not gonna ever tell you. By 8 p.m., Jill was on the path that was headed towards Ratcliffe, and as the sun was setting, the white fuzz began to look like people. The ghosts were to and fro, oblivious to everything, and chattering sounds of bones rattling in the distance, as if always right out of view, right out of the ear. The sound reminded her of bone wind chimes, or maybe the instruments of a band playing an endless non-song. Bats flew freely through the air, no longer connected to strings. The townsfolk lit the pumpkins candles, watching the last of the kids playing in the shadows. They still ignored her and her friends. We must have really screwed up. It's like the whole town is against us now. We ain't bad kids. That scarecrow was just on ends. We can just discuss our case. Ratliff's face came into view. The roofs of the town had filled themselves with holy crosses, as if knowing the world was about to get tipped over into hell itself. The shadows of the crosses slid across the ground, quietly pushing its will on the world around it, saying not even the shadows can deny our existence. Sam had made her way to the town. It was 9 p.m. now, and the shops were closing up for the night. It would not be open again until Friday. The day after Halloween, the skies began to crackle with lightning, almost as if it were too afraid to show itself. You could hear the sound, but it only lit up the clouds. But still needing to be heard. Still needing to be unleashing its fury. An eclipse, huh? With our world and the spirit world, and we're smack dab in the middle, stuck as if our clock face is waiting for 2 hands to pass by each other. And her and her friends were unwittingly dragged into it. By 10 o'clock, Jimmy and Sex had learned nothing. Jamal and Jill together at last. Sam, the butcher, and the maggot were lost to the unknown. And time didn't stop. It kept pushing forward. Halloween had thrown up on their peaceful, unchanging town. And worst of all, nobody seemed to even notice. The bone rattle had manifested itself into dancing skeletons that remained stationary in their view no matter where their heads were turning. The impending doom of their situation dug deep into their hearts. Not one could unleash this unknown doom on their unsuspected families. Not like they could be brought up to speed anyway. They would all act like the rest of the town, completely oblivious. Even the ones who were lucky enough to stumble on their friends were locked in a stationary loneliness. The sound of the beasts seemed to be unleashing the sounds of the beast seemed to be unleashed, and the growls chased wildly through the night wind. All any of them wanted to do was sleep. The farm of emptiness or the witch's forest, neither seemed a decent place to sleep. The people didn't notice them all day anyway, so acting as the hobos or homeless was an easier decision. They found a place in the bushes behind the benches and the sides of the abandoned buildings. Ratcliffe wondered about the ghouls. Had their devil vampires woken from their protective tombs? Had the undead actually entered the world? A world so close yet could never be called Earth? How could they say such things, fighting away the sleep unconsciously? The group, hundreds of miles apart, grew endlessly tired the closer they came to the bewitching hour of 3 a.m. This time was endlessly trapped in children's hearts, being Halloween-oriented. The sleep was so strong, it felt like death or a spider spinning its web around the future meal. They could almost feel the spider's 8 eyes above its damned pincers, telling nothing how much it wants to eat me. The butcher started a fire outside the town at the edge of the forest, as if instigating the demons to show themselves. He thought about yesterday long, but next to the insidiousness of being ignored in a public place, trumped it entirely. His nerves felt like steel. He was without his friends, his true power, his passion for being. He's seen why he chose the forest instead of the barren barn. He was nothing without his friends. He had to find them. But wait, what's different? What's happening? Outside of his view, it screamed inside of him, silent. 800 cups of coffee 8 years ago. Screamed, run. He stood up 10 minutes ago, in his mind pushing him even faster. Even the fortune teller's voice entered his head. He was running, not wanting to know he even wanted to know what was going on. The screams, images in his head. What's it going to tell me? Something new? Cut off by his faster and faster speed. Why he was lost. 1,000 years lost in eternity, lost to the darkness, unwavering, unanswering. Why? He leaped high into the sky, completely clearing the stream, sending him crashing into the soil below, full of dirt and rocks, his hands now with 2 gashes, and was leaking blood. Pulling up his hand away from his guys, only to notice a black shadow steaming in speed so fast came to a complete stop under the night sky on the other side of the stream. Its darkness shined in the blackness of the night, as if he was a light of darkness. It's nighttime. It stood there in the shadows as a shadow. It was always in front of them. Black blurs acting like white fuzz that had become ghosts of innocence. It was so bright. He stood there petrified in fear. His thoughts crashed his mind's train, leaving it gasping for answers. What's happened? Why are these questions raising? What's happening to me? Where's my friends? The night reached 54 degrees. The wind blew down the dead leaves. The sounds, slowly over the next hour or two, faded to silence. Even the dancing skeletons faded like ghosts to nothingness. There was no help in the world for them. They could not save themselves from sleep, and sleep they did. The deepest sleep life could ever have, dreamless, silent. Not even a monster screaming would wake them. The next morning, October 31st, Halloween Day, the group woke up to a world that had forgotten what had happened, as if it never knew it at all. Their eyes were free of the tremors that haunted them the day before. They had one objective: to find each other, to find their friends. It was the neighborhood. It was definitely a loss of words when it came to the options. The neighborhood was back to normal, 15% decorated, and all they quietly passed by. The people who were so lost in the holidays, not one of the group could tell if they had been seen or not. The entire world seemed empty. Is this the world we've left for our children? A world governed by money, by people who have no interest in the materials other than the money they can get from them? How could people act so heartless? Are they completely without imagination? Do they see us? Do they have no love for the things in people's hearts? Have that the things people's hearts have created over the centuries? The world was so empty now. The maggot found his way to the woods where the butcher was, locked up in a coma. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Be a friend of this lucky hero. The maggot looked on the two men standing near his passed out friend. One was dressed like a knight in a shining armor, and the other was a nicely dressed man with a mustache. He didn't know how to answer the strangers. The world was back to normal, but these two seemed to be right out of a fairy tale. Who's asking? What happened to him? The stranger stood there quietly for a few minutes. My name's Gomez Adams, and unfortunately, as my friend was fighting off 3 or 4 vampires that had your friend in their noses, your friend turned to find me standing there and fainted. Liar, the butcher would never pass out over being startled. And he caught up to his brain. He's a human. A human can't stop a vampire. They're as fast as a shooting star. They're as strong as 100 men combined. Yes, they also have no reflection, because its shadow is an extra body, both of which are as tough as a petrified tree. They can see through the senses of nocturnal animals in their range, and they have control over all the meaner things, from their minions to nature's weather. The maggot sat there quietly, unable to believe this knight had proven his own case against him. The knight's armor has been forged into points at the knees, elbows, and chin. He had a purple cape and a feather that was attached to the helmet. His eyes carried 1,000-foot stare in them. It seemed like he carried all his emotions all the time, yet his hand never left his broadsword handle. He got an eerie feeling when looking at the knight, like he'd seen him for the first time, and actually wondered if he was wrong. Could this guy actually stop the beasts he described? No, wait, 4 of the dark creatures as powerful as the creature he described? Plus, of course, the 2 straws that were teeth used to suck the blood out of their victims. Trust me, young one, Gomez injected. He's a dragon hunter, and all monsters know that a dragon is 100 times more than any vampire, or any vampire, let alone any vampire. A dragon can create multiple full-powered dragons just by imagining it. With wills 100 times stronger, 100 times faster, 100 times less likely to need to get involved in a fight to win the fight. What could you say after that? It was Halloween. They obviously were insane. Fine, a dragon slayer, huh? So, why would you wait with my friend there? Wouldn't you have something more important to do other than sit around with an unconscious person until someone passed by who knew him? The knight stood up off his right knee, rolled his sword around, pointing forward, and put his right hand upward with his right hand, took his helmet off, put it under his left arm. A knight of any caliber is bound by his integrity. I am a sir first and foremost, a title hard earned. I am honor bound to stay with the defenseless, even if he saved himself. He did make it over the spring after all, and a vamp can't cross the flowing water. They were quiet for a long moment when the question finally came to him. So how did he pass out? Gomez patiently spoke up with a pause. I don't typically wear my human form during the eclipse. Gomez Adams is a very complex being. He is a genuine native of hell, a violator, born to hurt, born to rot things with a single touch. When one day, 800 years ago, he met the witch queen, who turned away from her coven to join with him in marriage. He in turn abandoned his hellspawn and hell for her eternally. Their house took on the credo, we gladly feast on those who would subdue us. They lived for many years. When the violator heard of a vampire that turned from its blood rite, and not just any vamp, the original Nosferatu, Count Dracula, and had apparently secretly, unknown to the other vampires, all his minions, turned into a vamp-hating, vampire-hunting King Alucard. He had set up a number of laws for all of his children must follow or be damned. Be damned to the weak title as vampire, no longer being a vampire. Number one was any nest must have an organ piano that must be played at all times, allowing the humans to be aware that it's a nest nearby. Vampires have no laws unlike a vampire, but they're also not as resilient as a vampire. They live in a world of bloodlust, always seeking. A vamp is never sexual. They hunt to feed. Dracula is the only known vampire who found a mate. the blood queen Carmilla, who he had born Dee, the Dampeel, and after he had left her, he had found the reincarnation of his original wife, his lost love, Mina, who was born, oh shucks, with Camilla, the blood queen. He had Mavis born, his daughter. And when he got sick of Carmilla's bloodlust, he left her, ended up finding the reincarnation of his lost love, Mina Harker, and had born Dee, the Dampeel. Mavis, the daughter, is a full blood. Dee, the Dampeel, means half blood. With the separation of Dracula and his bloodlust, vampires scraped a bit of freedom, leaving him as defenseless as all the others. All vamps are full power at birth into the darkness and carry all the same weaknesses. Can't pass flowing water, can't approach red roses, garlic, or holy crosses. If you can put a stake in its heart, cut off its head, and catch it on fire, you can kill it. But any one of these alone, he can come back. But if the vamp doesn't ever drink blood until it dies, it becomes a daywalker that can spend a lot of time in the sun, but does have to sleep in soil. Unlike a regular blood-sucking vampire, it doesn't need to be the soil of its homeland. But considering how fast a falling star travels, usually about 3,000 feet a second, you can get there rather quickly. It's no big deal just to walk home. If they don't sleep in the soil every now and again, they will get weak. A daywalk can go near red roses and flowing water, and touch holy crosses even in a church. Gomez idolized Alucard and was jealous of his supernatural abilities, able to become any number of nocturnal beasts and take the human form without needing a fresh skin to wear. He eventually convinced Alucard his intent and convinced him to give him the vampire abilities, not knowing if it were even possible. Alucard decided he would want something in return, would want something that would protect him from anything during the day. Something that can stop a pack of werewolves if need be. It took 100 years to convince the original Boilermaker, Mr. Pyru Hart, a 6-foot-tall, long-nosed man with a pointy red hair and beard from out the sides, red hair from out the sides of the center. He had turned 100 blades. He had turned Mr. Pyru Hart, the original Boilermaker, had turned good 1,000 years ago and went into hiding from the Dreamkeepers. Gomez gave him away out of hell, and in return would gain 100 blades of flaming grass from hell to give to Alucard. The grass turns into 100-man army of Pyru knights. They were human-looking fire in black hell armor, invulnerable to anything except angels and gods. They were loyal and followed Alucard like any vamp minion before them. So, as promised, Dracula bit the Violator, giving him the ability to turn back and forth between his human form and his true form. He was never sure if Alucard limited the vamp abilities, or if it was his true nature repressing it. He hadn't heard of any vamps being born half power. Even Dee, a half human, would gain time and a half full power when in the range of a vampire, but when no vampire was around would only be half strength. These things meant nothing to him, of course. In fact, he was able to maintain all his abilities as a bonus. A hell violator is not some child's toy. It was more than he could have ever wished for. Over the next few centuries, Gomez and Morticia Adams, Mr. Pyro Hart, King Alucard, and everything except his right hand, Invisible Man, became a united force against the darkness. But devils are cunning, and dragons are nearly unstoppable. Unless you can know if it's true or illusion, dragons born from the golden eggs are supernatural. They know all the names of all the kings, eat only soil, knows all the languages. Dragons born from the dark eggs are empty-minded beasts that kill for no reason, that are as strong, as fast, and able to blow fire like any dragon, but is not able to do the supernatural powers. The golden egg one uses the dragons eat limestone to produce the hydrogen for the flame. The biggest secret about a golden dragon is the urban legend that says a Prince Charming or a knight in shining armor can slay it and rescue the princess. The dragon protects the woman, and only one worthy for her heart and can give her the life she deserves is considered by the dragon through combat to give her to him, acting as if he was slayed. I don't really know if such a lie was held over such a long period of time, but humans have a real knack for embellishment and playing the hero. Sam couldn't sleep, but noticed the sun was rising with her sleepiness, and they were both disappearing. Like the decorations, she walked through town, noticing the spiders on the webs were moving back into position before turning back into plastic. She looked in the shoe store and watched a huge group of elves finishing up making the shoes before jumping into the mouse holes. Maybe this will be a safe place if everything goes bad again. Halloween has to be worse than All Hallows Eve, she thought to herself. It was so early, the streets were still empty. This calmed her anxiety. There was already too much going on. Jimmy awakes alone in the middle of the pumpkin patch, where Billy the butcher was way too. Jimmy awakes alone in the pumpkin patch. Where was Socks? Socks was too happy to have found his friend. That he wouldn't run off by himself. But Jimmy was alone. Just him and that damn scarecrow. Crows lined the wrought iron fence that encompassed the pumpkin patch farm. He could feel the scarecrow staring at him, and his laugh was being drowned out by the screaming crows. He approached the gate, and it opened for him automatically. He finds Jill and Jamal crouched down by the bush near the graveyard. What's shh? Fighting, flagging their hands, forcing him to join in. Jimmy peered through the bush shield, and he didn't know what he was looking at. As he began to rise to get a better look, they grabbed him by the arm and grabbed him back down. Don't! It only gets worse. He gave them an agitated eye, as if to say, like anything can get worse than yesterday. He raised up slower this time. The graveyard had a thick white fuzz around it. It felt like he was looking through a long tunnel, like the graveyard itself was stretched into eternity. The place was so massive on the inside, he couldn't even see it all. Far in the darkness, lightning was crackling, but no sound reached his ears. The sky was so furious inside this place that the warm blue around him made him sick and nearly tossed chunks. Jimmy crept back down. "What do you think it is?" Ratcliffe whispered. "I walked by here yesterday and ghouls had been hanging out, like a gang had just found its new spot. Maybe that's a vampire house in there." Jimmy didn't notice the house, peeking back through the bush. Jill spoke up even quieter, adjusting her glasses. "The Scarecrow said we have to survive the eclipse. This is the eclipse. The spirit world's passing by the human world. They weren't the only ones finding these passing by the human world, period. They weren't the only ones finding these obscured places. The maggot was carrying the butcher over his shoulder. He loved Halloween and knew every decoration in town that was set up, and as he turned the corner, in the place the convenience store was now enveloped in a white fuzz. As he looked closer, he realized he's looking into a vast desert. The lightning in the background was terrifying. The flashes lit up the desert when there it was, a mummy, walking in this direction, with an enormous pyramid in the distance. Wait, no, not one mummy. As he began watching the horizon, at least a dozen mummies had pushed up past the horizon. He readjusted the butcher on his shoulders. "I'm not going to be the kid these moms find," and ran off. Samantha looked up at the sky. The odd feeling wouldn't go away. The sun seemed to be in fast forward. It was hard to tell, but you shouldn't be able to tell at all. She had looked at her watch. They were moving fast. The arms were moving fast. 5 seconds for every Mississippi. She looked back at the sun, knowing this wasn't a good thing. The night was going to get here faster, and she could only guess this was going to make the night longer. Where are the people? The streets should have been filled by now. Her stomach grumbled. She was hungry, and with all the stores still not open, her only hope was to go home. "Mom, Dad!" But nothing. Her brother was frozen solid, pouring cereal at the table. It appeared as though the pause button was now pressed. God's having a field day today. I guess he really does hate kids that act like the devil and stop caring. She walked over and tapped one of the cereal flakes that was floating in the air. It moved slowly, as if it was in outer space. Cool. She looked to the box, and the few that were falling. She went back to the box, took it, and the few pieces that were falling, and ate. Yeah, now I get the last bowl. When she was done, she put the box back in his hand and ate the pieces that were already in the milk, laughing at herself as she walked up the stairs. Her parents were still asleep, and nothing she did could wake them. Sam walked to her parents' window and opened the curtains. The world was silent, not moving, except for the sun, sitting there acting like it's frozen, but still speeding across the sky. When in the distance she heard a faint yell, "Hello!" It was Sax. He was near the school. When she arrived, she found him and the maggot carrying Billy. She ran, putting her hands under, trying to help. "What happened?" Apparently, the maggot, shaking a fly out of his red curly hair, spoke up. It seems he was saved by two weirdos who claimed he passed out by being chased by a pack of vampires. They placed Billy on the ground when they reached the football field. "No!" a huge voice spoke up. "It's not safe here. We must get to the castle." There, standing on the 20-yard line, was the Frankenstein monster. He was nearly 13 feet tall. "We can't go with Frankenstein." He looked down at the children with sad eyes. "I'm not the Frankenstein monster. That was the abnormal brain. After I achieved reanimation of dead tissue, I put my own brain inside." Picking up Billy, the kids rushed to save him, grabbing at the beast that was beginning to walk, unaffected. 4,000 years ago in Turkey, I was a mad scientist, but after I defiled Halloween, I was forced to survive the eclipse like you are. I failed, but luckily I was already in the monster's body and was impervious to most of the things that awakened this month. At that very moment, a small car squealed around the corner, never slowing down. It must have been traveling 80 miles an hour until it sees us, and then in under a second, it slows down to 5 miles an hour. Inside was full of angry clown faces staring right at them. When just as fast, a circus exploded in front of them. A horn blasted at the car that was being held by the nice clown. A horn blasted at the car that was being held by a nice clown on a ball. A girl wearing a shiny dress danced on a hopping elephant and detoured the car that was now back to 80 miles an hour, squealing around the next corner, being chased by the carnival. "See," Frankenstein interrupted, "a lot of things are awake. And the eclipse. How are you supposed to help us? You're just another one of them." "No, I have spent every eclipse hunting them. Right now I have stolen most of the strongest monster's abilities, in fact. Other than the ones I've never seen, all I have left is a werewolf and a witch. I even found a vampire to help me." "Vampire? What?" "Don't ask." "So you can do all of their tricks?" "Mostly." The sky was beginning to darken, and the sun was nowhere to be found. That's when they realized the city was alive. Children in costumes were trick-or-treating, and as the fancy-dressed ghosts had reverted into sheets with the ghosts in fancy dress that had been walking around the streets yesterday had reverted into the sheets with holes cut out. It was, if it wasn't for their lack of feet, nobody believed they were real ghosts. Even neighbors congratulated them on their costumes and how cool the Frankenstein one is. The group was so pleased being seen by something other than monsters. They looked around to find decorations everywhere. Orange and black paper cutouts lining the trees like tinsel, spiderwebs and pumpkins. Then in a line, a werewolf. "Dang," Frankenstein said, "of course," in a crowd of children. The kids seemed puzzled. Why would a werewolf trick or treat? Isn't it obvious? This holiday was created not only to disguise children from the monsters, but that monsters eat blood for the sugar content. Candy is so much more potent. Why chase people when each piece of candy is half a person? It's blood sugar amount typically. Okay, fine. But where did these costumes come from? My friend Lance, the dragon hunter that found your friend here, warned me you all were involved this year, and told me to help you. See, a dragon has 3 hearts. 1 human, 2 dragon. A dragon can give one of its dragon hearts away if it chooses to. This is not an easy thing to give up. A dragon loses half of its strength and range when this happens. This goes to who he gives it to. So you see, you're wearing an illusion from the dragon hunter to shield you from their eyes. So we're invisible? No, some of the older, more terrible ones can find you, but they don't like to be found, so usually don't attack groups of people. They follow the older kids that bag snatch and break pumpkins. The bullies will feed, and they will feed after the bullies are done and leave them alone in the dark. So that's why the Scarecrow called us devil kids. You met the Scarecrow? Yeah, he's the one who put us in here. Oh, you must have really made him mad. I guess that's why it's such a big group this year. Who is he for real? Frankenstein paused. Count Dracula may be the king of Halloween's nightmare, but the Scarecrow is like the queen of Halloween's guardians. He works for the PumpkinKing. It's the reason why people have put jack-o'-lanterns out. Because if a monster attacks, then the Pumpkin King will grow out of the jack-o'-lantern and save them from the spirit world monsters. Oh, Jimmy said we should smack pumpkins this year. The devil hates Jack and uses teens to destroy Halloween. No pumpkin, no protection. Use smashed eggs, stinky streets for days afterwards. Even toilet paper makes adults hate this time of year. Slowly but surely the devil's winning. Every year there's yes and less involved. Soon only the monsters will play, and with no candy on the streets, nothing will help them but finding people, like back in my day. Jimmy, Jamal, and Jill have not had such luck as their friends. They realized even though the townsfolk could see them again, they had become like ghosts. Jill grabbed at the store doorknob to buy a drink, only to pass through it. They uncomfortably walked through the wall, and the bell dinged. They jumped, causing the cashier to jump. Oh, very funny, kids. Happy Halloween. Great costumes. They looked at each other when, not knowing where the costumes were, the cashier didn't notice them come in or out through the walls. As they walked out, they watched a huge pumpkin swallowing a goblin. The goblin crawled around inside its face, and every time it tried to escape, a huge blazing flame blazed up like a firewall, then subsided. They heard the noise from inside, but didn't see the fire. He must have tried to dig its way out the back, and the fire blocked it there too. From high above, the sound of cannon fire caught their ears. Pirate ships were fighting on the clouds. You could almost see them swinging in between the boats, nearly falling off the curb, returning them to reality. They arrived at the neighborhood where the kids were trick-or-treating. They almost could hear the nightly news reporting how kids should always check the candy for holes, not only in the flat parts, but at the seams also. The first house was covered in spider webs, almost as if it was cocooned for eating. The kids walked right up to the doors and were greeted by marionette people. Huge spiders moved their bodies with their spider webs from the roof and from around the corners, directly out of sight from the door, the front door view. The next house over had a party going on, and goblins and zombies were bobbing for apples. The zombie had to keep picking its body parts out from the barrel of water. As the sun began to set, the sound of the skeleton bones began again. They looked at the sun, at the ground, and heard a noise that would haunt them forever. There in the distance was a witch, on a broom, circling the sun. Jill and Ratcliffe looked at each other in horror. The sun's billions of miles away. Even if she was the size of the earth, she wouldn't be that big. They knew by how perfectly the circle it was. The witch knew exactly where they were. They sped up, desperately wanting to find their friends. When in between the homes were dancing skeletons, and in others there were vampires attacking people. What hell is this? A nightmare in between everything I've always wanted. Nobody in the neighborhood noticed it at all, not even their voices anymore. Bats and crows filled the air. A vulture landed on something and began to eat. Monsters were everywhere. Were any of them human in costumes? They couldn't tell. Then, shining in the darkness were eyes, staring at them. They were cats, a lot of cats. "Guys, over here!" Jimmy, Jamal, and Jill instantly turned to find Frankenstein standing there. "It's okay, come on," one of the costume kids continued. When Frankenstein added, "If the cats found you, you don't want to be here." They agreed, running towards the monster. Luckily to find, it was everyone except Billy. "Where's the butcher?" They pointed to the monster's shoulder. "What did he? No, not him, don't ask." They all followed Frank to the edge of the forest. "We're not going in there." "Shh," Frank whispered. "I know it's dangerous, but if we stay quiet and if you stay near me, you'll be safe." The kids reluctantly got close, suction cup close, and made their way into the witch's woods. Every branch crackled in the dead leaves. Every noise told them they need to leave. Even the ever colder air in the wind reminded them of a witch's breath. The trip felt like hours. Then from the distance was an evil clown's face, standing there silent next to a tree. Then it was gone. Then another one, a different one, and then another. They were being followed by a huge group of angry evil clowns. Until a huge branch broke. They turned to Frankenstein, who was the only one big enough to break the branch. He quietly and slowly put his index finger, over his mouth, implying, "Shut up right now." After this, they walked extra careful. And there it was, a cottage, not made of candy, but looked like it's been here since before the dawn of time. Frank whispered, moving very close to them. "This wasn't here earlier today. I suggest we speed up. It's not that much farther." "Farther?" they thought. "We don't know where we are. We're in the witch's forest, so deep we found our house. Our parents said we shouldn't be here at all." The woods were horrible, but then something caught their ears. Something in front and from behind. "It must be midnight." Frank's voice was so bold they screeched. "It's okay now. The witch queen is flying over the moon. and all the kids are in bed. The adults' party is starting. The teens were lost. The idea of parents and party on belong on opposite ends and never get near each other, especially nicely. Then there was the Frankenstein castle high on the hill leading into the huge rugged mountain range. The windows were glowing like a disco was happening, flashing purple and pink. Looks more like a Valentine's party than a Halloween. I'm sure the St. Valentine Cupid will thank you for that one. Inside the party was full steam. Monsters were dancing everywhere. They looked at each other like they just got dunked on. And the only way out was past the witch's house. A hand landed on Jimmy's shoulder. A hand with no body. He screamed. "Don't worry, it's safe here," the hand said. "There's no monsters here, only guardians of Halloween. Don't worry, that's the invisible man. For some reason only his hand's not visible, or invisible." "Oh, who told you?" The party was incredible. Everyone was dancing the night away. Even the witch queen was partying. The teens explored the castle. How often does the opportunity come up? The music thumped in the background, and everyone was having so much fun. It was hard to believe they weren't. It's hard to believe they weren't adults dancing in costumes. They looked down over the balcony, watching the Halloween monsters from above. Frankenstein was now dressed in a pink party time shirt. Dracula was in a white suit. Disco, who knew? The party lasted all night. The next morning they awoke in their own beds. The day was over. Was it real? How did they get home? Something weighed on each of them. You would have expected them to get up and run to find each other, but that didn't happen. They were stuck in emptiness. The music was gone, the lights gone, the anticipation gone. What was left? Jimmy walked to the other bridge, to the old bridge where his friends were waiting. The old bridge wasn't a bridge anymore, just the remaining piece that turned into a dock when the new cement bridge was put in. "Well, after yesterday, I doubt we'll ever be afraid again." There he looked up to see. "What is it? Have you seen your family today?" "No, why?" "We don't think we got out," pointing down at the river. Jimmy was taken back. Inside the water was hundreds of ghosts, tipped upward. The upright macabre. Whoa. Oh. That's not the worst part. What? Noticing they were pointing at the sun. The sun was no longer the sun. It was a jack-o'-lantern, sitting high in the air. Jimmy fell silent and put on the same face the others had on. What could they say? Where could they go? The streets were empty. And the worst thing in history happened. Then the worst thing in history happened. The sound of cackling drew their attention to the sky, where they found hundreds of witches flying on their brooms. They were all in hell, and this was their greeting. Wolfman ran up on all fours. He had a white beard. That's when Frankenstein's voice came in from behind. "Go with him. I'll lure the witches away." He grabbed the screw on the left side of his neck and twisted it, and they watched him turn into a 6-foot-tall human man who began running at the witches. Yeah, the 13-foot-tall green tap dancer turned into a regular human. He said, "Come on," He said, "Come on," the wolfman shouted quietly, then ran past the graveyard, where a bunch of angry-looking skeletons were playing cards and smoking cigars. They entered the shopping district, where a pile of spiders jumped the wolfman as he fell from being tripped by the mummy's stretched-out wrap. He yelled at the kids, "If they capture you before the end of the Day of the Dead, you will never escape." They shook off the questions and ran. A zombie horde was coming up one road, 100,000 rats scurrying along the edge of another, a swamp monster coming out of the water near the river, and worst of all, a man in the suit appeared in front of them, standing quietly. They turned instantly to turn around, only to find the same man at the same distance away from on the other side. "Oh no, he's a vampire." The man smiled. "How? It's daytime." "That's not the sun. It's a lie." The vampire disappeared and instantly reappeared right in the front of them, in the hand of the dragon hunter, who had grabbed his face and slammed a wooden heart into his chest. At the same moment, a dozen vampires attacked him. The kids fell back in shock of the ferocity, when out of nowhere, a blaze of huge bright fire cleared them away. A huge 2-story tall dragon landed over his hunter. The dragon looked around and roared. The kids fell to the ground shaking. The kids felt the ground shake from the roar and felt very small, too small to move. The dragon hunter stood up and placed his hand on his friend the dragon. "I do believe they can't go any further." The dragon uses his illusion to form hands under the kids and lift them into the air. At this same time, Frankenstein turned back into the monster, used the switch in the left to turn back into the monster as the witches attacked, and then grabbed the screw on the right side of his neck. This increased everything except his size. This screw activates all the stolen abilities he's gotten from all the monsters, making him second to only a dragon, angels, and gods. Frankenstein was overwhelmed by their numbers. Witches use any means necessary. They use decay, rot, death, none of which are useful against an undead monster. But they also collect devils and beasts, creatures and ghouls. They want to own everything. Seeing the commotion, Gomez and Morticia Adams ran to help. Gomez broke out of his human form, becoming a violator with car brake light eyes, as Morticia, the witch queen, began doing spells. Pain is everywhere. The kids are soaring with the dragon high over the dark terrain. The sound of an organ below began blowing in with the wind. "What is that?" Jill asked the dragon. "We're traveling over a vampire nest." "We leave the pack of witches for a pack of vampires," they thought to themselves. Actually, we didn't, hearing their thoughts. "We left them to fly over Count Dracula's original nest." They looked down desperately, trying to find it. "You won't see it until we are nearly landed on it, or during the day. A Nosferatu hive is built in a canyon between two ledges. They build the walls with the dead bodies they ate. Count Dracula is their god, and they follow all his laws. Each Nosferatu is an exact replica. Each Nosferatu nest is an exact replica of every nest. Each room the same size, the number of bodies and where they're put exactly the same. Dracula may have turned away from but he can't deprive his minions. Meanwhile, Frankenstein was carrying a captured witch into his castle. He approached the staircase, touched the secret switch, causing the stairs to lift. A dragon roared, looking out to get an eye on the witch. More so the witch knows the dragon has an eye on her. Frank walks in and tosses her on the laboratory table. Frank can't use the essence of the Halloween Guardians. The only thing that saves the humans is that the Halloween heads are in complete control over their houses. And the last thing he wants is to destroy that balance. This witch would be fine. She was a greenskin, basically saying she's old and strong. In the days of old, the queen used to breed spells and abilities into them to enhance her own reach. If you don't need to do a ritual, then you have more time to play. If you don't do a ritual, then you have more time to play. Frankenstein learned a lot about each of the Halloween species before he turned them into his building blocks. This in fact was the reason he held off on the witches and the werewolves. The witches have an incontinuity between all their abilities, and the werewolf's ravenous behavior is made to take over its host. Even now he doesn't know entirely sure if it was the best interest to do this or to just stay as he is. So in light of these horrible simple things that can change the world forever, I say happy Halloween. A jump to the Day of the Dead. The scarecrow becomes a staff, the pumpkin king becomes a bongo drum, and the little bald guy in a straw dress shakes the staff and thumps the drum, with all the creatures of the night following him back to the spirit world in a huge parade, putting the kids back in a world that doesn't know anything happened at all. Halloween legend.